I looked you up, and then I found out that you're Irish, down the road, effectively, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I have to just reach out to you.
And we
Uh,
also have a set of governments who are allergic to doing their job. Now, I don't think anybody has trouble understanding it. I think people are overwhelmed by the sheer volume of, let's face it, it's like a slurry of nonsense.
it'll become clear to many people over time how many lies and manipulations and misunderstandings and just stupidity, sorry, I have to say it, just blind stupidity uh, around these issues, and we're getting dragged over the table in many ways.
You can no longer have rational adult conversations about things.
Yeah.
If you have any objection, any position, any deviation from the norm, there's hysterical shrieking and
How
labeling and
dare you? How dare you
how
question the
very
big
dare
narrative?
you. If I was getting 700,000 plus to have a heavy focus on climate change from the government,
Yeah.
uh, from a government that whose entire, in fact, climate policy relies on farmers shouldering the burden of all of the emissions of society, then yeah, I'd be bashing farmers too. Bear in mind that there are only two options. Option one is that they're incompetent and they don't know what they're doing, in which case they should be fired. Option two is they do know what they're doing, which means that it's malicious.
The average person needs to know that farmers really, they're looking at these global conversations that impact them so directly and impact their livelihoods. Welcome to Sustainability for Sinners, a non judgmental, informative, and hopefully helpful place you can learn about sustainability. I focus on health, water, food, energy, antibiotics, detoxifying your life, and much, much more. If you like what you see, then hit the like and subscribe button for more content coming soon. Enjoy! I'm delighted to present you with this conversation with Nadaline Webster. She's the author of the book Flawed Figures and Fragile Futures, Why Science, Not Politics, Should Be Driving Climate Policy. Great book, great read, very informative. She's deeply passionate about this subject because she's a farmer herself, and her partner has had an organic farm for the last 25 years. She also works in legal startups specializing in intellectual property. So she's got a business background or a business understanding that is very valuable in the context of agriculture, and particularly for small farmers who she is passionate about protecting. That is why a person like Nadaline should hopefully have her voice heard as much as possible, not just with regards Irish agriculture, which is her big passion, and protecting rural Ireland, but also on a worldwide stage, because the same issue is occurring all across the world with the shaping of agriculture, how other industries impact agriculture, and how we see agriculture, the nuances between the different uses of agriculture, and where things are going with regenerative farming, industrial farming, and just generally extensive farming. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy. One other point, we were talking about an environmental journalist who we were both getting annoyed at, who we both thought was getting things wrong. But it turns out I was talking about a guy in UK, she was talking about a guy in Ireland, and we didn't we didn't mention any names. But yeah, just in case there's a misunderstanding there, I'm referring to a guy in the UK who I will surely talk about in the future, because he has such a big impact in how people are perceiving these situations, and yeah, the future of agriculture and how we understand it. What else? She's going for election. She's going for election in Tipperary, South Tipperary, under Independent Ireland. And I truly hope her voice gets heard. That's the main thing, because she is there with a passion to protect rural Ireland, protect small farmers who don't have as strong a voice as they could have or should have or need to in this massively transitioning world where, yeah, carbon credits and emissions could either work to our advantage or disadvantage of a farmer, say. And that's why Nadaline's voice is so important in this debate, especially when it comes to government who may not have the best interest or a close connection or passion for farming and wanting to protect rural Ireland as much as Nadaline does. So I would only hope that her voice gets heard. And you know, another point I thought of, people might think, if I'm so big into the environment, why would I endorse or encourage someone who's a farmer? And that's because I come from a farming community, from a farming family, and I think everything needs to be held in good balance. The very idea of sustainability is to hold things in balance between the economics of things, the social aspect, and the environmental aspect, and then to obviously preserve or hand down what we have to future generations in good nick. But all of that needs to be held in balance with protecting people as well. And that's where I see Nadaline's strongest point of her work and how she sees things. So I would like to see someone like that being there for the small farmer, for the protection of rural Ireland, and also finding the balance of protecting the environment, which all can work together 100%. So that's it. Enjoy the conversation, and hopefully I'll have her on again and we can thrash out the details of the book a bit more. And I'll leave the details of where you can buy the book in the comments below or the description below. All right, bye. And we're recording. Welcome, Nadaline. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks so much for the invitation to participate.
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? I'm delighted to be able to speak to you because I'm just, um, I, I'll be honest, carbon policy and everything related to it is one of the most annoying points that I can think of that I don't want to wrap my head around, although I know it's necessary to do it. And then there's you, who has dove in so deep into all of these issues relating to climate emissions and how it impacts agriculture, our economy, and the people that live in this country and
Mm,
probably around the world as well, because it's all a similar blueprint, different in every country, but a similar blueprint of the powers that be that might be influencing and the people, and every country has agriculture. So and yeah, we basically need someone like you that has the I don't know, the drive to look at these things so deeply and then be able to speak about them in plain language to regular folks like myself who aren't able to decipher it and get overwhelmed by it. And we're also been fed lots of, it'll become clear to many people over time how many lies and manipulations and misunderstandings and just stupidity, sorry, I have to say it, just blind stupidity uh, around these issues. And we're getting dragged over the table in many ways uh, without being aware of it. And a lot of it relates to our politics, the people that are advising them, shoddy calculations in the background that we're basing our calculations on, that all feed into our daily lives and of farmers in particular. So
Yes.
that's why I'm actually delighted to have you here in in this thing.
Virtually speaking.
Um, so um, so just to also, sorry, I'll finish my rant in a second. The reason I even got knowledge of your work was because I was listening to a podcast from America talking about the madness that's going on in the world with carbon credits and emissions and everything. And it's from a guy, I even have the book here, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. He coached Kobe Bryant and a load of people. He's quite influential in America. And this guy, I highly rate his mind, and he's well read. And he was discussing you with Jane Buxton, and then I looked you up because I thought, hey, she has her finger on the pulse on something that's really going to affect us. Right now, it's affecting us, but it will affect us for decades.
It will,
So
yeah.
I looked you up, and then I found out that you're Irish, down the road, effectively, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I have to just reach out to you, and that's how this conversation came to be. So I'm delighted, and I feel like this was actually meant to be.
I
Um,
do. And I like it when I think what's missing hugely from, and it's not just a farming thing, it's happening pretty much in every aspect of Irish life and international life, maybe too, is you can no longer have rational adult conversations about things.
yeah,
If you have any objection, any position, any deviation from the norm, there's hysterical shrieking and
how
labeling and
dare you? How dare you
how
question the
very
big
dare
narrative?
you?
You know?
And it's almost outrageous that maybe you went and looked something up.
Yeah,
And I think that it's not even, it is complicated, and how everything ties into everything else is complicated. But I really don't think that anybody has trouble once you kind of get into it and you have conversations about it and you're able to sort of join the dots on things. I don't think anybody has trouble understanding it. I think people are overwhelmed by the sheer volume of, let's face it, it's like a slurry of nonsense.
yeah.
Just, every day you get up and one of our members of government, or there's some new policy proposed, or there's some new scheme happening, or there's something happening in our schools, something happening in our healthcare, something happening and you're like, how can this even be happening? And a
Mm.
lot of times you're like, but that's absolute nonsense. And it's nonsense, but you don't. So when I published the book,
By the
um,
way, this is the book. Um, Flawed Figures and Fragile Futures. Very interesting. I'm getting through it right now, and
it is heavy, for which I apologize, but it has to be,
but with some funny commentary as well that I burst out laughing with a few times. So and it's readable. It's definitely readable for the average person, and in particular a farmer that has
farmers.
interest in understand just getting your head around what's going on in the background.
And how
Um,
wrong the numbers
that
are, because they're not a little
yeah,
bit, they're a lot wrong. And everybody knows that they're wrong.
yeah.
And so, you have environmental people in the media who are giving huge amounts of airtime, and they
One
can
in
willingly
particular that's
say,
gotten too much lately, but I'll go into it another
yeah,
time.
well, we know why. If I
Yeah,
was getting 700,000 plus to have a heavy focus on climate change from the government,
yeah,
uh, from a government that whose entire, in fact, climate policy relies on farmers shouldering the burden of all of the emissions of society, then yeah, I'd be bashing farmers too.
yeah. And do you know
I
what? It's
probably wouldn't, because in fairness, I'm a lot of things, but I can't be bought really. So I wouldn't take it. But I can understand how an organization getting 700,000 a year to kick this group of people might find that enticing. But I do think that they should have more principles than that, and probably as an overarching thing. And I say it often, and I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to say it again anyway. When you start thinking about all of these things and how they interconnect and how ordinary, everyday people are struggling as a result of decisions that are being made, how their rights are being slowly eroded, how they're being railroaded into things they don't want and they didn't ask for. I always say to people, you need to bear in mind that there are only two options. Option one is that they're incompetent and they don't know what they're doing, in which case they should be fired. Option two is they do know what they're doing, which means that it's malicious and they should be fired so hard that Indeed.com would refuse to upload their CV for at least a decade. I sit very firmly on that because, we have a lot of independent TDs who are very outspoken, and maybe some in smaller parties.
Hmm.
But the vast bulk of politicians in power in this country, they know that the things that they're saying are at best not the whole picture. They're only giving you one piece,
Yeah.
and they are willfully misleading and confusing people. And I have a real issue with that. I have it, it's happening across the media, it's happening from politicians, and it's happening um, citizens assembly on biodiversity who just happened to have, things like 90% of whom agreed completely outright with the government's position on absolutely everything. Now,
Yeah.
you can call
That's
that
dangerous.
coincidence. I'm happy to go along with coincidence. I'm totally fine to say it's coincidence. I'm just saying it's convenient. That's all. I'm not saying that it was arranged. I'm not saying that it was in some way manipulated, but I am saying it's dreadfully convenient that this is the way these citizens' assemblies turn out.
Yeah. And ju just the idea, you're dead right about either incompetence or what did you say, maliciousness?
Maliciousness. There's only two
It's a big
options.
word.
There isn't a magic
Uh,
third one.
yeah. Like what I this is a bit wider from the thing, but what's going on around the world, what I do definitely see is farmers, particularly small farmers, being used as a scapegoat. If you're looking at this stuff long enough, you'll start realizing that the powers that be, the big industries, the big emitters, the ones that won't even disclose their emissions, in many cases,
Hmm.
they need a scapegoat. And farming, particularly when I say small farming, I don't mean there's big farmers out there that are in the same boat that are getting the same whack on the head. The industrial farming isn't. Uh, uh, Industrial and intensive farming isn't. But the small farmers are getting smeared pretty much, as far as I see, to be the big baddie in the situation, even though they're the ones that we rely on for food. And in Ireland, it's part of our culture. I come from a farming background, as in my uncles are farmers,
Mm.
um, and I see this like sorry, and for me, I'm big into protecting the environment, and
Me
want
too.
clean water, clean air. Um, I understand why people don't believe in climate change.
Mm.
I've seen enough arguments back and forth. Even that I could get done for and try to be pinned against the wall because I'll even entertain the idea that it's not real or that I can understand where people are coming from when they don't believe it, but we all
Mm.
basically understand there are environmental issues that we need to get ahead of. And uh, when you have these big corporate interests that, if we talk about, I don't know, cleaning up pollution, all of these things, um, that impacts their cash flow. They need a
Mm.
scapegoat. What's the scapegoat that isn't very organizing together on things because it's very hard to organize small farmers together. So they're
To be
easily divided.
fair, To be
Yeah,
fair,
no, well,
it's pretty
sorry.
challenging to organize farmers full stop. It's a little bit like herding cats. We're all quite individual people, and we're all
Yeah,
farmers are not a sort of homogenous group. And because of
yeah,
course there's different types of farming involved in it, and sometimes, they're competing with each other for
yeah.
land prices and
And
so it's not, but I don't even think it's because they need a scapegoat. And I think I would nearly
yeah,
be happier if I thought that's why they were doing it. It's because they actually need a place to dump responsibility while they work out what to do. Like, people ask me, do I believe in man-made climate change? And I say it's kind of the wrong question. So I don't have the necessary expertise to make a determination. Much like yourself, I do a lot of reading, and I try to be, oh, I try to be aware of having fixed and kind of rigid viewpoints, and try to push myself to be more open about things. So,
100%.
because we all have our biases, and, we farm and we want to continue farming, and I have cattle on this farm and I have no intention of getting rid of them to satisfy anybody.
No.
So the reality of it is then is when you delve into these things, that is a filter through which you run information. And when you're speaking more broadly outside of just your own farm, it's really important to try to step outside of that.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the expertise to make that determination. And I don't see how it's relevant anyway. Because whether or not I believe in climate change, man-made climate change, and whether or not you believe in man-made climate change, the UN believes in it, the World Health Organization believes in it, the EU believes in it, and the Irish government believe in it. And so we have a set of national and international policies that are designed to achieve net zero.
Mhm.
Now, this is where, the likes of maybe some of the environmental campaigners like John Gibbons would start jumping up and down, pointing fingers and shrieking climate denier, right? So here's the problem. We're reaching net zero in all of the countries in order to diminish the amount of gas that's in the atmosphere. Grand, not a problem. If you really believe that that's what you needed to do, you would want to be really precise about your measurements. If you said to someone like me, go forth, I've hired you in this company now, you're the strategy person, uh, go forth and reduce our spend. And I would say, okay, what are we spending? And they present me with a list. And I said, well, hang on, 50 grand is an awful lot to be spending on, Facebook ads. And they're like, oh yeah, that's an estimate. Sorry, what? Like, how, without having any of the information, as accurate as it can be and as meaningful as it can be, if you want to achieve net zero and reduce temperatures in the atmosphere and the fate of the entire planet and 7.6 billion souls living on this planet hang on what you're doing, then I think you're going to try and make a good job of it. I think you're going to look at these gases and say, what is affecting temperature? What isn't affecting temperature? How precise is our information? How can we make that information more precise? How can we make these things more targeted? We're not doing any of that.
Mm.
All of these countries walked into the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, and this is where we got signed up to all of this, and then that got reaffirmed. They tried it with the Copenhagen Accord, that didn't work, and so now we're in the Paris Agreement. Grant. The Irish government was part of that. And when they came home, having had a discussion with, I think at the time, 165 countries about how the planet is going to come to an end in a couple of decades, and we all need to sign up, start taking action on this. They didn't come home and go, what should we be investing in today that's going to help us meet those goals? What infrastructure do we need? How do we start planning for how we're going to do this? And the EU didn't do that either. None of the countries that signed up to that did. Instead, they spent the better part of 30 years investing their energy into building a sort of carbon gas exchange system so that things could be offset against other things or mitigated by other things. And are you serious? like, I don't know whether I believe in climate change or not, but I'm looking at these guys and I'm thinking, I really hope you don't believe in it. Because if I thought that you genuinely believed that the trajectory we're on is going to end the planet, and this was the best you had for solutions for us, that's the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. Never mind tipping points and temperatures and,
Mm.
melting ice and rising seas. The fact that you came home, you signed us up to that and did nothing for 30 years except to pillock about with international trading systems for gases. And then you woke up one morning and said, right, now's the time. We're going to start cutting all these things and making every single one of the people under your care suffer as a result of it. That's unconscionable. And like, really and truly, at that point, I'm not going to say I don't care, because obviously, like, climate change, and if things go the way that they're predicted, that's hugely important to all of us. But what should be more important is that you didn't do a thing.
Mm.
You didn't do a thing. You could have started for planning for like a nuclear power plant in Ireland. You could have started, biomethane. You could have started better public transportation. In fact, arguably, you drove the country on knowingly and deliberately to produce as much emissions as is humanly possible for 30 years, and then decided to stand on the brakes. And that's a really big problem. And there's no party in government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, cannot stand there and say, well, it wasn't our party, we weren't in charge at the time. One of you two has been completely in charge since 1992.
Mm.
What were you doing? And why were you doing that?
Yeah. Um, it's funny, it's evolved to something that when I'm looking at it now, I don't have trust that it's been done right.
No,
As putting it simply as anything there, I don't believe that we're doing it in the right way. And I do believe that on top of incompetence and hanging around waiting for everyone else to, oh, what's America doing? Oh, okay. Well, if America's doing it, well, then I guess we're in too. But it, like one of the other big things is the influence that the corporate interests have
mm,
on derailing it. So like so say what I understand now more than ever is that corruption in politics is or that they're easily swayed is such a big part of it. And right now it feels like not only is there the incompetence in it and hanging around not doing it properly, but there's also the manipulation tactics in the background that are
mm.
funneling through. And this is not just Ireland I'm talking about, this is
No,
worldwide, that
globally.
it's being hijacked all across the board. And where you're like on your fingers on the pulse there, because it's like we need to be able to speak about these things without being climate deniers, without
Mm,
environment haters, and go like it's been hijacked. Right now, I all I see around us is the bigger industries having the loudest voices and figuring out a way to manipulate the policy or lobby to do this in their favor, and uh, small farmers come at the cost of this.
yeah,
And yeah, I totally accept what you're saying there as well, that we have been sitting on our laurels
we
as a
have.
state, and probably most countries around the world have been dilly-dallying. And now to add insult to injury, when we actually finally look like we're doing something, which there is progress, let's not
Yes,
say
there
there
is.
isn't.
And
Uh,
farming is making a lot of progress, much more
yes,
than any other
Ireland,
sector.
Ireland is like what we should consider ourselves lucky. This is controversial because I know
We're
farmers are
not a
still getting a
heavily
bad deal.
industrialized country.
We're lucky. Sorry, I missed that.
We're not a heavily industrialized country,
Yeah, and
which puts a disproportionate focus on farming.
yeah, well, true. Yeah, well, we have a lot of industry that makes a lot of money in Dublin and maybe some other parts.
And we
Uh,
also have a set of governments who are allergic to doing their job. Now, I mean,
and that feeds down the line.
it does, but it feeds down in a way that people don't realize. So, like, um, I'm relentlessly pragmatic. Okay, so if you work in the
Good.
startup area, the reality of it is deliver or die.
Yeah.
If you work in sales or marketing, you can get away with a certain amount of dilly-dallying, perhaps in product development or, more specific things and more kind of technical things. But if you work in sales, marketing, and marketing in particular, you're not meeting your goals. Your head is the first one to roll because we can live without marketing. So you better be bringing it. Because if you're not, bye.
Yeah.
Once the cash flow crunch comes, you are the first one out the door. And it makes you kind of, and I mean, from a farming and a kind of horsey background, you're kind of tough anyway. A friend of mine used to say, I grew up,
Ready to go.
yeah, I grew up not far from the top of the Devil's Bit Mountain, and he used to say they breed those mountain women tough, and I was like, you goddamn right they do. That's,
It's
that,
like you know the Connemara ponies are they're loved in say the Swedish market because
yes,
they grew up tough, yeah, and
they're
they'll
just hardy,
yeah,
hardy.
exactly,
We
as they
say like
should be.
those tough little mares, she's hard as the road, and kind of how you have to be.
Yeah,
And I haven't had, my life really hasn't allowed me the luxury of being super soft about things. And I suppose I'm trying to learn how to be now, sort of connect with.
same.
I suppose I'm maybe a little bit less intense. I was going to say aggressive, but that's not the right word. I'm less intense than I used to be about stuff, which is good because in the current climate, in meetings with various ministers, when people are actually genuinely lying to your face, I probably would be arrested for what I would have said 10, 15 years ago. But today, you learn to kind of soften it a little bit, I suppose. Um,
Yeah.
and you talk about manipulation, like myself and a friend of mine, John Hargan, we met with Martin Hayden in a shed down in Kerry there probably 2 years ago
That
to
sounds as
discuss.
shady as it could be, but go on.
Well, no, he was doing a tour of
You met
various
in the
farms
shed.
and whatnot.
Yeah.
So yeah, met in the shed for a bit of a deal. But we were just there was a group of us gathered together to have a conversation with him, and so he was on a tour of doing different things down there. And to be fair to him, he did very kindly agree to meet, even though he was familiar with me. So kudos, right?
Lovely.
That's
Yeah.
brave. I'll give you that. But he said to me, how dare you say that my party has done nothing for farming? And I'm looking around me at some sort of alternate universe in which it is what I just said isn't true. But he said, we were talking about removals and emissions. And at the time, myself and John were pushing hard for farmers to be granted, not granted because it's ours, but for the ownership of carbon removals to be recognized, that the people who are creating those removals are the ones that own them. And that's not how things are.
Mm.
But he said to me, you can own your removals if you want to, but then you'll also have to own your emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was instinctively, lividly angry. But I hadn't quite thought through why that was. So I had to take it away kind of think about it a little bit. And what I'd said to him at the time was, when did you ask me? When was I asked if that's something that I wanted? And so that's the first thing. A lot of things are happening, not just for farmers, for everybody in this country, that they didn't ask for, and nobody
Yeah.
asked them if they wanted, but they're going to pay for it, and they have no say. So, the rule forever has been he who pays the piper calls the tune.
Mm-hmm.
But we're all paying the piper. There's no tune calling here.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Irish people have an absolute right to a hand in their own destiny. That was, absolutely granted to them, and they don't have it today. So then I kind of went away and I thought about it a little bit. And I thought about the fact that really he was talking about peatland emissions, the figures for which at the time were enormous. But myself and John had already been doing a lot of research work And we knew that the peatland figures were way wrong.
Hold on, can I just ask you, peatland emissions,
Mm.
are you talking about the if they're released when they're drying up, is it? Or what do you mean?
Yeah, so they're talking about uh, peatland that is currently used for farming that has been drained.
Oh,
Is
okay,
really
the
the
yeah,
and
right,
boglands and
right.
whatever, but there's a broad swathe of what comes under the heading of peatland emissions.
Hmm.
And the figures that we had for those at the time were really, really huge. And those big figures were used to drive the conversation around nature restoration, that we would have to re-wet all of this land.
Right.
Even though the information correcting those figures was available before the nature restoration law was signed or agreed to, the news didn't break to the public that those figures were wrong until afterwards, which I consider to be quite sinister. And again, this might be complete coincidence. I'm not making any accusations. I'm just saying, isn't that helpful and convenient? Now we have the law. Whether or not it was based on anything real is irrelevant. But because so many farmers in Ireland have peatland on their farms, there was a huge fear in relation to being taxed on those emissions. And I realized afterwards what he was really saying was, if he's equating ownership of removals with being paid for them and ownership of emissions with being taxed for them. So it's purely a financial thing. Now, it's not purely a financial thing to me, but
Hmm.
I kind of understood the point that he was making. And the point that he was making was this: if we pay you for your removals, we'll have to tax you on your emissions. And of course, that's not true. You could tax me on my emissions without paying me for my removals. I pay tax on my fuel in my vehicle, and I'm not being paid for my removals. The two things are not linked together. You can it makes sense to people that they would be linked together, but I'm already paying taxes on some emissions, and there are proposals to introduce more. In what way do I not already own my emissions? I own my emissions. They can tax me for any emissions that are created by me or any property that I own at any time, with no associated requirement for them to pay me for my removals. And then I thought about it a little bit further, and I thought about the messaging, and I thought about the information available to farmers at the time that all these discussions were in force. And I realized that ultimately what happened there is that in some manner or form, members of the Irish government had conversations with a group of people. And those conversations really boil down to, if you assert your right to own your own property, a constitutionally protected right, might I add, then we're going to tax you on your emissions. We will penalise you for doing so. And that penalty might well put you out of business if you're a farmer who has a lot of peatland. That is mafia-esque behaviour. The only people who can make a decision about whether to levy a tax on peatland emissions are the government. They're not going to be forced to do it by anybody. And what they're saying is, you do this thing I don't want you to do, then I'll do this thing you don't want me to do.
Hmm.
Which is a sort of, I suppose, political equivalent of, walking into somebody's garage, running your finger along the sideboard there and saying, lovely garage you have here, be ashamed if something happened to it.
Hmm.
And that's the moment, really, where the book began. Because I am so done. I am so done with taking this nonsense. And it's not even from a farming point of view, from a women's rights point of view, from an immigration point of view, to the point of view of whether or not people have a right to say anything about what happens in their own country or participate in things, like this. There's all this coded language that says, people don't have a right to veto who comes into their community. True. If I want to buy a house in a particular area, no one can say, well, we don't like her, so she's not allowed to buy a house here. True. Totally true. Do have a right to have a say in what I pay for.
Hmm.
Those two things are not the same thing.
So, this is the thing that, like, the perfect storm for someone like you with your business background, and you're a farmer,
Mm,
and you have the head enough to be passionate enough to write a whole book on it and dig around in this so much.
mhm.
That's the perfect storm, you know. I like the way you even put that. It makes my blood boil a little bit.
I know, right?
And so I think you will be. People need to understand that this stuff is happening, and they need to listen to people that are really in the know, that have a steady head on them. Um, yeah, that wants to protect Ireland, its culture, its farming community. That's
Mm.
all part of this. So
It
I
is an
I'm
empowerment too.
grateful that these perfect storms happen, and you are one of them.
We'll
You're a
see how
storm
long that
too, right?
lasts. But I think that people feel in this country powerless. If you ask me, you talk to people about women's rights, you talk to people about what's happening in their schools with education, you talk to people about healthcare, you talk to people about, farming things, you talk about life, hobbies, affordability, choice. The biggest roadblock I come up with people is just feeling completely powerless
Yeah.
because everybody's locked out. If you are an enthusiastic cheerleader for whatever thing the government has going on right now, you're inside a wall.
Hmm.
NGOs will support you, the media will interview you, you'll get time on the TV, you'll get time on the radio, you'll be invited to participate in various things. I'm sure that you will accidentally and completely, in a completely unconnected way, appear on a citizens' assembly, for example. All the doors open
Yeah.
for you to participate in public life and public decision making as a matter of course. If, however, the opinions that you hold, the thoughts that you have, the information that you have is in any way inconvenient,
Hmm.
you are locked out.
Yeah.
That wall is all encompassing. Now, you can meet with government ministers, you can meet with scientists, you can meet with state bodies, you can meet with NGOs, you can meet with various corporations, you can meet with various groups. You are not breaking through that wall.
Hmm.
And I think probably with myself and John with the carbon removals action group, I will have to the one thing I would say that we have achieved is I feel like we've managed to some degree to take a very difficult conversation to some degree mainstream
Good. Well
and
done.
get some level of attention. And I think people are listening more now than they were. I know Minister McConalogue, when we met with him, probably right back at the start, we had an opportunity to ask him a question or two, and I pulled him on measurements, and he was saying, well, the figures are pretty accurate, like they do need improvement, but they're pretty accurate. And then last year, when we met him, he was like, they do need a lot of work, and there's a lot of international discussion to be had about how they should be calculated more accurately and what should be done. But of course, all of this is going to take time. And I'm like, well, that's super. How many of us will be left? By the time you take your 10 years to work out how you should have been measuring us, how many of us will be left to benefit from your largesse in finally getting off your ass and getting around to, putting some fresh batteries in the calculator and working your fingers down to a little stub? And the answer is not many of us. There won't be many of us left. And more than that, there won't be 1 ounce of apology or compensation for the people who lost their property, they lost their livelihoods, they lost their reputation, and maybe even, and I don't want to be dramatic about it, but nonetheless, the topic of mental health in farming is a hugely important one.
Hmm.
These lads, a
Big
lot of
time.
times, they're isolated, they spend a lot of time battling the weather, battling conditions, battling machinery, the bits keep falling off. on a routine basis, no matter how much they try to put it together, battling financial problems
Yeah.
without a huge necessarily community or even sometimes family support, because like farming is all encompassing and your family makes sacrifices
Yeah.
for you to exist as a farmer. And yet it's something that's so embedded in you, you can't not do it.
Yeah.
And the mental health aspects of getting up every day, listening to absolute rubbish from your government that you know that they know isn't true, and then being hammered by the media and having exposés and having huge attention on picking out every single negative every day about everything that you do and having it blown up, magnified, photocopied, and passed around the office on a daily basis
Hmm.
is a serious issue.
To
We
detached
have,
people, to
mm,
detached people that work in offices and might not understand the lives of farmers and what they go through.
I think that everybody, well, you don't need to understand somebody's life to know that saying awful things about them on a daily basis is harmful.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just people like everybody else.
And they're doing an honorable job
They
as
are. It
well.
used to be
We
a
need their
respected
food.
job.
Go to your fridge. Go to your fridge. Look inside. Unless it's from a big industrial agriculture, wherever the hell it's from, that
Mm.
meat, dairy, eggs, that's all from them. And sorry, oats and
Veg
everything
and
else.
yeah,
Everything.
grain
Everything.
and all the bits of it that are real food.
Yeah.
But I mean, and then you start to realize that um, you know, back sort of 30 years ago, I think it was, and I'm cautious about saying this because actually this is one I haven't done. There's a tipping point in research always where I'm like, okay, I have a good grasp of this now, and I'm not at that tipping point yet. Um, but I was introduced to the concept that processed food, ultra processed food, really came about as a targeted thing about 20, 30 years ago when the tobacco companies started getting
Yeah.
interested in ultra processed food. And we are talking about people who have a huge background in how to addict people to substances that might not be good for them.
Mm.
And that's been brought to bear. So the definition of food has changed. You know, what I would have called food growing up is not necessarily what my fridge is full of now. And I know, and I don't know if you've read Jane's book, Jane Buxton's book.
Not
Uh,
yet.
I highly, highly recommend it.
Plant-based con, right?
The plant-based con. She's gone into a phenomenal level of detail. And when you start to look at it and you look at how real food has been demonized,
Mm.
and you look at the timing of all this, so you say 30 years ago, well, what else was happening 30 years ago? Well, we were signing the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. What else was happening 30 years ago? You know,
Hmm.
there was Kellogg's and other companies with a vested interest in convincing people that, you know, fat gave you heart attacks. So what you
Yeah.
need is a high carb diet and to come away from, you know, real fats and real food.
Yeah.
And so there are, you know, multiple strands of all of this, and they all feed into the one place, which is we need to get rid of livestock. There's the, you know, corporate profits line, there's the medical line, there's the
Extensive livestock.
climate line,
Yeah.
there's the environmental line, and all of them are all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah.
So when I say I believe that 30 years ago, they decided that we have to, let's assume, grant some sort of kindness or genuine intent and say they believed at that time in man-made climate change and that we need to reduce the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And I'm taking that as a total given because I'm not into arguing the point. Do you know, it's just a waste of time in my
Yeah.
view. I can't prove something one way or another. I'm not interested. And even if I could, what am I going to do about it? Nothing. So moving on. It's not a good use of anyone's energy, I think. But unless, of course, they are expert in that thing, then
Yeah.
not.
There we
But
go.
I'm not getting into it. So just assume man-made climate change is real. They had really good intentions, and they looked at it and they said, okay, we need to get rid of fossil fuels. But to do that, we would have to plunge everybody back into the dark ages, which they're not going to accept. There would be riots and whatnot. And we think that people would be more willing to live without steak than TikTok. And who knows? They may well be correct. But that's the decision that was made 30 years ago.
Mm.
We need to buy time. And in order to buy that time, we need to grow a ton of trees to pull as much down from the atmosphere and hold it here as we humanly can. The problem is that most of that land is used for food production. Now, it's not just even livestock, tillage, vegetables, fruits, what have you. Most of that is used for food production.
70% usually around of a
70%.
country's land is
Yes.
agriculture.
Yeah, and I noticed that there was some article in the Irish Mirror there 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. It was actually the tipping point for me in deciding whether or not I stepped into the political arena. Because this article started with, did you know that farmers own 70% of the land in Ireland? And I'm like, shock horror, people who work on land own land.
Yeah.
Why are you trying to insinuate that this is some sort of sinister, look at the powerful agri lobby group? And I'm like, powerful agri, no one with any power would end up in the absolute train wreck of a situation that we were in. If farmers had any real lobbying power, we would not be standing where we are. I'm looking at where fossil fuels are standing, and I'm saying that's powerful. They have.
And I agree,
group.
chemical companies as well, like Monsanto, all of that. If you start going down that rabbit hole, you'll really see the world a little bit different as well.
I haven't dug into the agri-chemical side of it, but what I will say is this, is that people with resources have power. People without resources do not have power.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at, 135,000 farms in this country, more than half of which earn less than 30 grand a year, it's not powerful people. I don't know to what extent you need to be kind of fooling yourself, but actually they're really not powerful people. I think that farmers did have quite a lot of voting power once upon a time in this country. Fine Gael would have always been the farmers' party, and now they're the killing farming party, I suppose. That's maybe not fair, because I don't see any different from any of the other parties, actually. That's unfair, and I should apologize for that.
Sorry, it's all around the world. It's the same.
It is all around the world,
so,
but
it's not.
Farmers were once our biggest indigenous industry.
Yeah.
There was a time when the export markets from farming were the only exports we had, or not the only, but certainly the main one. And those local farms supported so many industries all around them. In every rural village, in every town, in every whatever, farm mart days, people who worked on farms, the money that was coming in through farms was what kept everything up and running. And that's not quite as true today as it once was. But I think you'll find and see, and when you start knocking out farmers, the landscape and the financial landscape of rural areas will change, and not for the better.
Mm-hmm. Lose its heart to the culture, say. It's all linked to the culture that we have here.
It is, but also because, and I probably, this is maybe a hot take.
Go on.
Farmers are many things. And I mean, these are my people, farmers and horse people and, rural life in general. I have been part of that community my whole life. And these people are right at the center of it. And a community operates around them. Farmers are also difficult and grumpy and, not grumpy, maybe gruff, and they can be, the younger generation are different. They are simultaneously, sometimes, and again, they're not a homogenous group. I'm not labeling them all as being exactly the same thing. But, I couldn't rock into a local farmer to have a conversation about my feelings about something, because you would be laughed out of the yard. Right. So the valve on my slurry spreader is stuck. I have
Yeah,
2 days to get all of this spread, and you want to talk to me about your broken fingernails. Go away now.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
at the same time, if I picked up the
Well, they
phone,
need to be tough like that,
no, they
you
have to
know?
be, and it's I'm the same way, and so it's not criticism. I'm
No?
pointing the finger at us all. We tend to be relentlessly pragmatic. You know, there's
Yeah.
the does it move when it shouldn't, duct tape. Does it not move when it should, WD-40. You know, there's just
Where's the bale and twine?
where's the baling twine? There's just get it done mentality. Because you have to be like that, otherwise you won't survive being a farmer. But
Yeah.
at the same time, if I rang a local farmer because Storm Ashley has delivered a tree across my drive, there'll be a tractor up pulling out that tree in 20
Oh,
minutes.
yeah.
You watch somebody broken down at the side of the road. You watch, even for myself now, and I've never been a sort of quota or gender diversity hire in my life ever. I don't think anybody ever considered
Shame on
hiring.
you.
No.
No, no, no. Let's move
Yeah.
on from that.
Yeah, exactly. Moving swiftly on because I have strong feelings on this topic. But
Yeah, everyone does. Everyone does.
I would just be so insulted by that as a concept. But I mean, I'm a farming woman, so can I change a tire on my car if I get a puncture? Of course I can. No bother at all. But if I break down at the side of the road and I'm busily doing that, um, cars will flow by you.
Hmm.
20 years ago, they didn't. But cars will just pass you by. If you happen to be on a rural road and an old boy in a tractor comes around the bend, he's not going to pass you by.
You
He's
hit the
going to
lotto.
stop and he's
Yeah,
going to make sure that you have totally won the road breakdown bingo at that point. That is your,
absolutely.
and I watch them during frosts, and they're out scraping roads and putting sand out, grit down for people and towing cars that have slid into the ditch and
You
move
know,
around with a PTO
yeah.
turner, bringing water to places, clean water into the village, bringing loads of um, firing, rocking into the local village with a trailer full of timber because there's lots of
Do,
elderly people who are freezing to death at
yeah.
that present moment.
I have a
They are
personal
a
story.
huge part of the community, a
Yeah.
huge part of the community. But when you have people then, because they all work together and they're all together all the time, and these are people who are
Oh,
available during the day and they're
yeah.
they're they're floating about the place and meeting at the mart and meeting at the
You're
shop.
describing my uncles.
Completely, like this is just a totally different way of life than a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
So now take those farmers out of that situation and say, okay, we paid you some few shekels to rewild your land. And as it turns out, we didn't pay you anything because in so doing, we completely eliminated any value that your land had. And it's now, it went from maybe 15,000 an acre to maybe 200 quid an acre. That's what it's worth now. So basically,
Wait,
we've,
from rewilding? How do you mean?
yeah. So when you place restrictions on how you can use land, you decimate the value of it.
Right.
And people
And where?
don't understand that. So let's say I have a house
Okay.
and that house is worth 300,000. Bog standard Irish house. Now I say, okay, well, you're signing up for a grant, and that means we're going to redefine your house as a holiday home. So it can only be lived in 6 weeks of the year. That's it. If I try to sell that house, is it still going to make 300,000?
Hmm.
No, it isn't, because
It'll
somebody
change
might
the
want to live in it.
value.
Well, it is a
Material use.
material change in value. And
Yeah.
so that's what happened to the hen harrier boys. And so this is where, evidence-based decision making is really important. In the private sector, evidence-based decision making is everything. I can't just pull things out of my ass and say, oh, well, I think we should do this thing because I heard. You need to prove why you're doing it and convince everybody, get a consensus and bring everybody along with you. The hen harrier population was diminishing to 10, 15 years ago, and a conversation started about whose fault that was. And I'm not going to give you any prizes for guessing who they decided the primary
Was it
driver.
the small farmers?
It was the small
Ah,
farmers.
for
This
God's
is
sake.
a this is a
Lads, where were
no,
you
but
at?
try to brace yourself, right? So they decided that the solution to this was to designate land, and that designated land would have limitations and restrictions on what could be done with that land. And that had the net effect of completely wiping the value of that land, plus a loss of farmer income.
Yeah.
So there was a compensation system put up and money was set aside. And there was two ways you could access that. One was through the REP scheme and the other was through a separate payment that operated on a 5-year cycle. And the next thing that happened a couple of years into this, farmers were getting a small amount of money on an annual basis to compensate them for their loss of income, and maybe not for their land value at all, but to try and compensate for the loss of income. We get a couple of years in, we hit 2008, the recession hits. Ultimately, the REP scheme is disbanded. And as the 5-year cycle of the other scheme this kind of came to an end, it simply wasn't renewed. So all that ring-fenced money, well, we don't know where it went, but it didn't go into farmers' pockets. Now, I read, and again, not 100% confirmed, but I read the estimated losses to some almost 5,000 farmers that were involved in the designation scheme was around somewhere in the region of 98 million. That's the harm that we did to farmers. What was the benefit? As we stand here in 2024, do we have more hen harriers as a result? And the answer is no. The population has further diminished. So now, the basis for all of these kind of schemes and ideas, because obviously you have to have a legal basis for impacting people's income and impacting their private property and impacting all of these things. And so the phrase that gets thrown out is that it's a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. Well, if the thing that you're doing is not going to achieve the legitimate aim, then it's not a means of achieving the legitimate aim. And then you have to ask yourself if it's proportionate. So we spent 98 million to have a further, I think, 10% drop in hen harrier numbers. That's what we cost those farmers. We cost them restrictions on their land. We cost them land value. We cost loss of livelihood and income to achieve nothing. So when I tell you that when they're done implementing all of these things, and farmers sit there and they count up their losses to achieve nothing, and that there won't be any compensation for that, I'm not even slightly kidding. And if we sat here for the next week, I probably would not run out of examples of exactly this.
Yeah.
I could talk on this topic.
And I've seen it European-wide. There's examples.
It's insane.
Yeah. Italy, the same.
There needs to be no evidence whatsoever for us to say this thing is going to work.
Yeah.
So then you bring it back to climate change and you say, okay, is there any evidence that Ireland achieving net zero will affect the temperature in any way? The answer is no, because we're too small. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying we shouldn't achieve net zero. What I am saying is that no matter what we do, we will have zero, as a nation, zero impact on the temperature. We will have a participation award. What we will get from it, what the Irish people will get from it, is a vanity metric. And so I think that we shouldn't be driving our economy off a cliff to achieve it at speed. That's not to say that I don't think we should achieve net zero. The net zero thing is a different thing entirely. But my point is, if you're not, like, let's say Ireland could make the difference between a full degree temperature rise and a half a degree temperature rise, and what that means for the planet. Yeah. Then there is a conversation to be had with the Irish population to say, listen, if we sacrifice these things, we will achieve this. Irish people are being asked to sacrifice a lot. And what that's going to achieve is nothing.
Well, sorry, I get you, but on the other side, the fear is these big fines that we'll pay if we don't play
Uh,
along with the global narrative. That's the big that's the thing that will be pushed. Like if we don't do this, we who was it? 8 billion fines down the line. If we don't implement policy for reduction in emissions in transport, which is the hardest one, if we don't get EV vehicles out, blah blah blah, and it's all like there's fear mongering definitely in that. I do respect the idea that if the world is the economics of the world are shifting, we better be bloody aware of what's going on, because if we're caught sidestepping and the wrong way, we can land ourselves in a whole lot of trouble. So I get the economic threat, and if you're not able to stay agile
there's no economic
and
threat.
adapt, I get
Listen,
that. But
there's no economic threat. They
but
made
the
that up.
really,
Well, who signed up for it?
well,
Why?
we
Why
talked
will
about this.
fines
We
be?
talked about this, didn't we? About the
Why
Paris
will
Agreement.
fines be imposed on us? Because these couple of lambs lamped themselves in front of a flamethrower and they signed us up to things without
Yeah,
any consultation, without any assessment of what that might mean, without
yeah.
any assessment of what it might cost the Irish people, because we have no representative democracy in this country. That is an absolute myth, and it is the thing that makes me crossest about all of it. We
See,
have people who say, vote for me, and for the next 5 years, I'll do whatever the hell I like. And I
yeah.
hope that I'll insinuate myself into a powerful enough position that I will fool enough people into voting for me again in 5 years' time.
And I'll still
All of
just
this
be
is a
taking
game.
the special interests behind me to you vote me in, but
Yep,
I'm going to listen to these guys.
I will do whatever I like.
Yeah,
That's not representative democracy. And the thing
no,
that annoys me about this is that I work in, marketing and sales. If Coca-Cola put a new recipe out there and they want to know how 40 million people feel about their new recipe,
mm,
they can achieve this in a week. We live in the information age. Tell me how it is that there is no system by which the government can, like you look at the Citizens Assembly, we have these portals, the MyGov place where you register, you go to sign in, you have your ID. That's a
oh yeah, yeah,
verified
the
user
website,
of this
yeah,
government platform for them to, do your tax returns or to
yeah,
sign up for different things or get a medical card or whatever. There's a portal that you have to be a verified user of and sign in.
yeah.
Tell me why the government cannot send out through that portal a message to everybody registered on it to say, please take this survey and indicate how you feel about this.
I would love that.
I don't think that it's a nice to have. I think it's a need to have. I think
Yeah,
that going forward, uh, like I look at it now with the general election coming up, and you look at how everything is geared towards keeping the people in power, regardless of what anybody feels about them. How much media attention is given to existing candidates. Those people have had 5 years to develop a relationship with this whole constituency. They have much bigger budgets in terms of posters. They have an army of, party supporters that'll get out there and plaster those posters everywhere. They know which rules that they can break. I mean, I'm told that there are posters up already, even though the election date hasn't been announced, and there are strict rules in relation to postering. And so those of us who are, more inclined to obey these things are like, oh no, can't put up a poster. Like the main
well,
parties are
you're
shutting
not big and
all over the
powerful
country.
enough, you know,
Well, yeah,
in that sense.
I
Like
think,
if they, the 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 big political parties that are in there a long time, and are used to the whole, they know the system, they know how it all works, they know how to move around. It's not naturally that way. Like if
it
we
is
were
naturally that way.
in a company for 20 years, we'd obviously know where we can get away with things and where we can't
We
get
know when
away.
Sheila at the reception desk will look the other way because it's like, 20 to 5 and it's Friday. And, you got her something really nice in the Secret Santa last Christmas. And, so you're an operator inside a system. And what really should happen with that is there should be two sets of rules. Existing TDs, existing people who have those relationships and systems and have that knowledge should be restricted. And actually, the Irish people should be given access to new people who want to run. And I don't say that from the point of view of myself. I say that from the point of view of these parties work so hard at manipulating the situation so that the electorate never get to know who might have done a better job of representing them. And that's deliberate. And the system allows them to do that because the system was created by the people who were in power to retain the power. And so it all becomes, it's a farce, really. Like we look at these elections, and I think one of the things I would say, aside from anything else, is actually, no, there's two things on this. The first is ask yourself whether you believe that any of these parties have any intention of fixing anything in a way that would build an Ireland in 5 years' time that you think you could tolerate. And because lots of people want things, but it doesn't mean they intend them. So like I might say, well, I'm on a diet because I want to lose weight. And if I stop at the shop on the way home and buy a 6-pack of donuts, I don't really intend to lose weight, do I? I just want to lose weight. I just want to magically make it
Look at
happen.
the property crisis,
Exactly.
right?
So no
Yeah.
steps being taken, but not only that, no real knowledge being acquired. So when I say, that I set out, and myself and John, to be fair, to set out to empower people, I do mean that. And there's two strands to power. Knowledge is one, and people will say to you, knowledge is power. And I'm saying, not if you don't use it.
Mm.
You can sit there and you can gather up all those pieces of information, and that's happening on social media up and down this country and every other country. There are farmers, there are people who are particularly interested in one particular train wreck that's happening, and they're gathering up information and learning about this bit, connecting to this bit, and oh look, this government have done this insane thing, and these people are doing this absolute nonsense, and oh look at how all of that connects together.
Yeah.
But they're never able to use it. So then you look in the case of Ireland and you say, every person that stands in Dáil Éireann either believes in representing you or they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And the more, you talk about a change in government, and it's actually really disempowering for people because they think, oh, well, unless we get this huge big party that can change all of these many things, we're at nothing. It's not true. Every one person who is behind the wall, who is determined that every group will have their say and every group should be given a voice. And the majority of people in this country should be the decision makers on all contentious topics, actually.
Because it's our
One of them,
country.
because it's our country. But every one of those behind the wall is one less of those. It's not only one more of us, it's one less of those.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and so I'm not tied necessarily to politics. What I'm tied to is gatherings of people who believe that the Irish people have a right, which they were guaranteed many years ago now, but they were guaranteed the right to hand in their own destiny.
That's the essence of democracy,
It
right?
is the essence of democracy.
And we spoke for, Nadaline, I think 3.5 hours. I almost sent you a screenshot. My back was aching. I was sitting in my Cullen, of all places. I'm not even from my Cullen, sitting in a car, chatting to you, and then we hung up, and I got out of the car and was like, we were chatting for 3.5 hours, and my back was aching because I didn't move that whole time. There was a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah,
But like, this is why I wanted to talk to you properly here as well. It's just getting back to having control over our own country and being allowed to uh, discuss and thoughtfully disagree on things, and to allow room for conversation. We missed the like the Late Late Show. There was only two channels 2 decades ago, say,
Yes.
and we all watched it, and we all watched the debates, and now we're all in our little Instagram, TikTok, whatever YouTube. We're all down our own little algorithms. We're not talking with one another, so you're not even seeing people agree and disagree with each other. We're just seeing one point of view or the other. But no one's
Well,
actually
really, you're only
figuring out
seeing one.
the because all sides will be right in some things and wrong in others. But
Yes,
we learn from one another, and we
yes,
have to talk to one another. And
yes.
God damn it, I'd love to get back to that
Well,
more.
I think
And
that the algorithms are particularly important because, um, so say for example, in relation to the book, if I made, and despite doing the research, if I made a video stating very clearly that um, that the figures for emissions from livestock are wrong,
yeah,
there's only one platform that I could put that video on and have it stay up:
Twitter,
Twitter.
Twitter.
Now, don't get me wrong, Twitter has its own, we're anti these things.
Hmm.
But, Facebook won't let that video stay up. And
Really?
TikTok
Okay.
won't. As soon as somebody reports it for, climate change denial, gone.
We're gonna have to clip this out because it's going up on just that part.
Yes, yeah, you have to take out that bit. But that is a fact. So you're only hearing those parts of it. And then you
Yeah.
get the shrieking harpies, that the minute you kind of step into something, because like I don't know everything about everything. You don't know everything about everything. And there are always, in every situation, um, and particularly in the introduction of policy, there are always unintended consequences.
Always.
And we should be awake and alive to those things. So you introduce this thing thinking you're doing great things. And
Yeah.
actually, as it turns out, about half the people you were hoping to help
Yeah.
are pushed further under
Uh, a
by the
prime
thing you just
example
did.
is first-time buyers allowance. My
Yes.
God, sorry, I've a background in property, degree in property,
Hmm.
worked in it for 15 odd years plus. Um, and like every time the government has introduced a waiver of the first time buyers um, costs or stamp duty or anything to do to manipulate the market, which initially sounds like a good idea, all it does is add money to the asking price of property, raising the property prices, and
Yes.
putting the houses out there further away from the actual buyer that wants to get on the property ladder or whatever, get a home, and this is the unintended or intended consequence of such actions. Like
Yes.
sometimes it's stupid and naive, and they couldn't see through the domino A knocks domino B knocks domino C all the way to Z, or they do know, and it's all artificially rising the prices of
Again,
property,
only two
and that's
options: incompetent or malicious.
there we
Those
go.
are your two options. Like if you're a government, if you're a regular person, but I'm going to be fair actually and say um, that I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of black box thinking. And
No, I'm not
so,
familiar of the concept of critical thinking either. Go on. Yeah, sorry.
so
Black
from
box
the point
thinking.
of view of black box thinking, I think it's a guy called Matthew Snide wrote the book, and it's a really good book actually. And it's sort of endemic as practice in startups because very often in startups, you are doing things that sometimes haven't been done before, or you're doing things in a way that has never been like it's never been done in this way before because you don't have the resources to do it the way it should be done. So you're now making it up as you go along. Um, and so you always have to start somewhere and iterate.
Hmm.
You couldn't possibly, if you sat down, now sometimes you can see a number of a number of consequences down the road. And there are ones that are plain and clear as day and should be, um, should be obvious.
Yeah.
So you can look at that and say, well, it is so obvious. If it wasn't obvious to you, then it should have been.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have
You
some
big
leeway
dummy.
to say,
Yeah.
I feel like you did see that coming and you intended this crappy thing for me. Okay.
Hell
But
yeah.
put that to one side and say, what should happen is then you need to be able to pivot. You need to be open to feedback. You need to be able to pivot. So, like, I might come up with a strategy for achieving X, and then you go and talk to the product development team and you say, well, that's great, but actually, that is going to cause this problem here.
Hmm.
And you take that away and you say, okay, well, that problem can't happen. So I need to think about this again. And then you go back and you talk to the sales team, and you talk to the marketing team, and you kind of go around the houses a little bit. And then you come up with something and you think, this is awesome. Okay, this is actually going to work. And then you go and talk to the senior management team, and they say, yeah, not going to happen. The investors will never okay that.
Yeah.
And back to the drawing board you go. But even when, so you manage to get a consensus and you have a strategy that you feel, strongly will work, you have to let go of your ego. Because once you launch this thing, all that matters is the goal at the end.
Hmm.
So one of the rules in life is that you need to invest more energy in the goal than the problem. And I see an awful lot of energy being invested in the problem and not the goal. And this is huge. So if you're investing energy in the goal, then the goal is everything. And if somebody comes to you and says, this thing isn't going to work, you're not going to take this personally and say, well, this was my strategy and of course it's going to work and you're talking nonsense. You say, oh crap, really? Why? How is my goal going to be affected?
Hmm. Yep.
Right?
You need to be flexible to
And you
achieve.
need to be flexible and you need to be able to iterate and you need to be able to start somewhere and say, I know that I don't have all of this locked down,
Yeah.
but we're going to get better and we're going to get better at it every day. And that's
Yeah.
how you deliver things
And
because
you
no
stay humble as
perfectly
well.
formed. You
You
have
stay humble.
to, which is hard because, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a scene in House. I don't know if you've ever watched the series House, but there's
The
a scene,
Doctor, is it?
the doctor, yeah, I
I've
love.
never watched it,
I,
but I heard it's
I
good. Yeah.
highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. I love Hugh Laurie anyway, from Jeeves and Wooster and Blackadder and many things over the years. But
Ah,
the
Blackadder.
was the head of the hospital is giving out to him, and she said, you always think you're right. And he said, I find it really difficult to operate in life on the opposite assumption. And I'm like, fair, that's a fair argument. I think there's a balance somewhere because being that sort of can do and tough and pragmatic makes you push on.
Yeah.
And then every so often somebody will be like,
Yeah.
back here. And
Yeah,
you need
you need that.
you need that
Definitely.
balance. So I often think that I'm really good at pushing things forward, but I need a team. I need, you need consensus. You need to work with people. You need to have information coming from
And
everywhere.
not be surrounded by yes men kind of
And
thing.
not, well, yeah, I mean, surrounding me with yes men is probably the most dangerous thing I can
Dangerous thing.
imagine. Like,
Dangerous
I
thing.
would not welcome this in any way. I need people around me who are not afraid to push back. And I'm not
Yeah.
afraid to be told, well, hang on now. You were right in what you said, but you're missing a piece. And
Yeah.
here's the piece you're missing. And you say, okay, I didn't know that. I know it now. And on you go again. And there's no shame in it. And I think the startup world, one of the very best things about it is it teaches you how to deliver.
Hmm.
Because if you are, sitting over here coddling your pet project in the corner and getting really upset and offended when
Yeah.
anyone ever mentions that maybe this is not going to be the all-consuming, all-delivering, all-singing, all-dancing Joseph and the Technicolor coat that you hoped it was going to be, you got to take that personally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
stick around in this world, you do. And then
And you'll
for
be back
a
tomorrow
snivel,
with a
and then your
better
manager will say things like,
version.
"Shut up, come on, get up,
Yeah.
get, get,
Absolutely.
get." And
Absolutely.
you just it's nice, but it makes it much more frustrating than looking at the government, who are allergic to doing any work themselves. We outsource everything. We outsource our thinking to NGOs. We outsource the actual delivery of anything to private investors who naturally that doesn't make them bad people, but they prioritize their company and their profits and their own
It's the
interests.
game. Yeah.
As
It's
well,
again.
they're going to do. There's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is that the government shouldn't have been dumping the housing strategy in the hands of, vulture funds and private investors and multinational companies in the first place. Why do they not just build houses?
You know the way we were talking about us voting them in, but also listen to the special interests whispering in their ear
Hmm.
constantly. That's the lobbying. Um, like, damn it, I lost my train of thought.
There's
I was
too
like,
many
I
things.
had
You
three,
got
I
stuff.
had three
Yeah.
tabs open because we're speaking about a lot of things. I'm like, okay, we'll try and. I wanted to tell you a story about my uncle dragging people out of the ditches and everything, and then we moved past that.
All right.
But with
I move quickly,
Yeah,
and
I know.
everything is connected to
I'll have to
everything that's
like
in my
just
head all
shout
the
into you.
time. Yeah.
Um, but oh yeah, sorry. Now it's back. It's back. Um, I read this article lately about I can't remember which party postponed a tax on derelict sites in cities
Mm.
around Ireland till after the election.
Hmm.
What does that? What does that show you? Who
It shows you that they think we're
benefits?
stupid.
God damn it. Like, if you are really serious about solving the housing crisis, and it's worse here than, do not let anyone tell you that other cities around the world have a bad housing crisis like us. We are so
We we're
individualized.
special in this
I
regard.
I
We
worked
are
for
special.
I worked for an investment management platform in Germany, and I looked at with with other investors. We were looking or to invest money into properties around Europe, and the only one where there were queues around the corners constantly for lettings and for houses to buy was Ireland. And when you look at the cost proportion of average income to versus the cost of the houses, Ireland is way over it. And we had London rents in Dublin, but not the wages to match as well, and also a cost of living crisis on top of it. That was the cost of living crisis before the cost of living prices even hit Ireland. That's how
Mm.
expensive it is to live in Ireland. And Eddie Hobbs and the Rip Off Ireland thing is no joke. It's no
No, it
joke.
is not.
That has always been the case in the at least the last decade or 2 decades, and it's we need to pay attention to it. But Ireland is quite unique in its property crisis around the world, and I've seen these documentaries from America, from Australia, and from Germany talking about Ireland and its property crisis. So you're kind of going, if you want politics to solve something, and they are instrumental in solving things, and then you see just before an election a, a bloody piece that an announcement saying that we're going to postpone the legislation around derelict sites. There might be a good reason for it, but I don't see it other than you're benefiting people to sit on land and not pay money for it to get it shifting. And if, hey, I'm all for a good use of land and a healthy property market. This is not an attack on landlords. It's not siding blindly with the tenants or the underdogs. We need a healthy function market for everyone, and we need to think long term about that because it bites us all in the ass if we don't.
It does. But I
Right?
will throw a couple of things there. One block that I have there is that we have a right to own property.
Mm,
And we need to think
absolutely.
really
I'm not,
hard about the
again.
methodologies that we find acceptable from this government in terms of coercing people out of their property. That's a huge
Yeah.
issue. And I find it interesting, and you don't get a lot of sympathy from when you talk about this publicly, because again, there's a huge generation of people who will probably never own a property. And so their sympathy for people who own property and the rights that they want to protect is limited. And I totally, totally get it.
But that culture is in Germany as well, right? But
Hmm.
the the rents are reasonable enough, and the security of tenure is there that you can make
Yes,
something your home. You can stay there for generations.
which
In
is not the case
many
here.
cases, it works out better that you can stay in a rental apartment or house,
Mm.
and not like you're actually often financially positive to rent that long, but you feel secure. You know, it's within your, it works.
Yes.
Here, telling people they have to rent forever, or that that's their only option, where there's
Plus, there's a
issues.
feeling here. There's a tie to owning your own property in this country that people
Yeah,
feel really strongly in a way that they don't in other countries. And that's part of our culture, and that needs to be accepted.
absolutely, part of
But
our
you're
history.
talking about the derelict house tax. Were you familiar with the residential zoned land tax?
No, go on. Do go on.
Yeah, the government
Hold on, this
decided.
is supposed to be about agriculture and emissions, but
Well, it is
what?
about
Oh,
agriculture and emissions. This is exactly what it is about. So,
oh,
and
okay.
it's everything. You know, I talk to farmer groups all the time, and I say to them, when it comes to how we're going to fix the problems in agriculture in rural Ireland, in everything that's happening, is all roads lead to Rome. Everything comes back here. Eventually, if you dig into any part of what's happening in society, it comes back here to an enforcement of international projects that we didn't pick, we didn't want, we didn't ask for, but nonetheless we're getting. And how do you derail that? But the residential zoned land tax created zoned land, new zoned land around existing towns and villages. So the stated purpose of this was to push developers to develop land that they had purchased and that was sitting idle, which doesn't explain why they zoned a ton of farmland, actively farmland, as in farm, like land with cows standing in it or crops standing in it right now that happens to come close to the edge of town. And then they introduced this tax, I think it was 3% of the value of your land per year. And I think it was the ICSA, the Eddie Punch, was doing some of the numbers on it. And so forgive me, Eddie, if I'm misquoting you, because I might well be. I hadn't looked at my residential zoned land tax folder in a little bit. But I think he worked out it would take 11 years for you to owe the value of your land. So basically, in 11 years, they can just take your land because you haven't paid the taxes on it. So a couple of things were happening with this. One, they weren't necessarily going to notify you. They wrote some articles and you had to go and visit a portal to see if your land had been zoned to find
Yeah.
out whether the tax would be due. And then they said, well, it's not really going to affect farmers because if your farmland has been zoned, and you're actively farming it and you don't want it to be development land, then you can appeal and it will be removed. That was the theory. In practice, what happened was at least all of the farmers I'm aware of who appealed received a standard, your appeal is refused. So what they're trying to do is push farmers out of farmland and sell it
Or
to
construct.
developers to be developed. And again, this is about coercion. So you're minding your own business, farming your farm, and the
Literally your own business. It's your
literally
business.
your own business.
Farmers are business people.
They
That's their
are, and
business.
your own property. And they
Yeah.
say, well, actually, it'd be really convenient for us if you sold that land to a developer and he built some houses there. That would really help us out. So if you don't do that, we're going to tax you. We've picked out the bits of your land we'd like to use in that way. Now, prior to that, if the government wanted to use a particular plot of land, regardless of who owns it or what it's used for, they would have a compulsory purchase order on it. But increasingly, this government, and to be fair, other governments around Europe, they're getting very fond of what's called an administrative fiat, as opposed to introducing legislation to do something. So the preference is, and again, I think about things strategically,
Yeah.
which makes me lean more and more to the malicious side as opposed to the incompetent side, It seems to me that there is a trend for creating legislation that opens up standing for preferred NGOs babbling a preferred narrative to be able to take legal action against the government, to force the government to do the thing that the government wanted to do, but they needed to allow an NGO to sue them to make it happen, right? Throw an eyeball in the direction of what's happening with gender. Park it. Swivel back over here. Then when it comes to things that are impacting other people's rights, we introduce legislation that says we can just take your land whenever we want it, there's going to be a problem. And that problem might be quite a fighty problem, actually, because now you're dealing with a bunch of people who really aren't going to take that. So need to come at it differently. Rewind a bit and look at the PSC card. When they brought out the public services card, it was a social welfare card to prove your identity to the satisfaction of the Department of Social Welfare to cut down on social welfare fraud. Click, buzz. Then Regina Doherty came out and said her famous, it's compulsory but not mandatory. What they did was they used a piece, an already existing piece of legislation in relation to social protection to bring in this card for identification. And then they expanded its use out across departments. So you're now not going to be able to get a passport unless you have a PSC. You're not going to be able to get a driver's license unless
This
you
is
have a
the
PSC.
same argument as the vaccine passport thing back in the day, that you'd need it for different things, to travel, to whatever, you know?
You don't have to have it, but you're just not going to have a life if you don't.
But yeah.
And we need to decide very narrowly what we're prepared to accept from them in this regard, I think. But Digital Rights Ireland took a case against the government, and the government lost. And I don't know why this case isn't publicised to the extent that it should be, but they did a huge service to all of us, because what the court found was this is not a national. In fact, what you have done is introduced a national ID card by stealth. And you may not do so without the correct legislation. So the only place that you have introduced proper legislation for this is in social welfare. So you are entitled to say you must have a PSC to access social welfare payments. That bit is fine. The rest of it, you can say if you want to do this thing online, then you're going to need a PSC. But otherwise, there are other ways to do it. They might be slower or less convenient or take more time, but you can download a form, fill in a form, post it back. You must offer other ways of doing this thing that don't require this card. The residential zoned land tax is exactly this. It is leveraging you cheaply off your land and getting that land in a convenient location developed because we want to. What's happening with climate change and the extent to which farmers are burdened with offsetting emissions from other sectors is exactly the same as saying, okay, we want to solve the housing crisis. And there's a lot of people in this country living in houses that have spare rooms. So you, as a group of people, you own property capable of solving our problem. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to, and linking this specifically to forestry, but to things generally. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to offer a generous incentive for you to let out your spare room. But we're not going to tell you that we're not going to let you take that spare room back out of that marketplace. If you have a bad tenant or you have a problem or that tenant leaves, well, housing is a right, and we want to enshrine that in the Constitution by way of referendum, along with watering down the constitutional protections for private property ownership. But, if they've rented out that room and forever now, the government have an interest in that room. And then once they have an interest in that room, those payments slowly start to go down until now you're getting a sort of a pittance for your spare room and putting up with all of the unpleasantness and perhaps inconvenience and of having strangers actually in your home. We need to be awake to the ways in which process and policy and legislation are being very intelligently put together and utilized to push people down certain directions. Like most people a lot of people will ask, why won't farmers go into forestry? Because the
That,
reality is once you do, you're never taking it back out.
mm,
You are
this is
not
what I
allowed to
wanted to actually
go
talk
back
to you
out.
about. That
Mm.
when we were moving on,
It's
about
a huge problem.
yeah, the the hen harrier project, all of that stuff.
Mm.
Uh, like I think what people who aren't farmers or don't own agricultural land that are, they might be looked at by someone who cares about the environment and go, why don't you just put loads of trees there? The government said that you'll get money for putting loads of trees on your land.
Mm.
That's a material change in your land.
Mhm.
Um,
That you cannot undo.
once you grow those trees, that
Like
land can't
marriage,
be
you're
used.
stuck now.
Yeah, you're stuck now, and you also have to have a felon license and all these things. Um, and the promise with like it's a perfect example with the hen harrier project that
Mm.
the money went down as soon as the economy took a hit. I mean, fair enough. Historically, if you look at how hard Ireland got
Not fair
hit
enough.
by the
Not fair enough.
no,
There
no,
was
no,
a point
sorry,
of
no, fair
ring-fence.
enough that
Yeah.
the size of the hit of the
Mm.
economy was
Mm.
massive. But let's not be naive to think that zero, low interest rates, declining interest rates for 4 decades have inflated prices across the world. It's had a massive impact. If that thing comes crashing down, because there will be sectors and parts of our world and investments that have been overly reliant on this low interest or 0% or even negative interest rates that have been
Mm.
factored into calculations, then the thing crumbles, then we could potentially end up in a very bad economic situation, no matter what country you're in, but say Ireland, and then you have a promise from a government that we're going to spend money on you, dear farmer, to change your land to forestry. And I'd be thinking, if you don't have that pot of money set aside for 30 or 40 years to pay out to farmers the promise that they've got,
Mm.
then you do not have my trust that that money is coming into the bank accounts of these farmers for this potential sacrifice of the use of land that they could be using for other things. And if you only give
And
me
will
a
never
five
be
year
able to
if you only
use.
give me a 5 year promise and go, well, we'll reassess every 5 years, that's too dangerous as a business owner of a farm, say.
Mm.
You're not that you shouldn't do it, but there is a risk there that you have to think about, and the average person needs to know that farmers really they're looking at these global conversations that impact them so directly and impact their livelihoods. Like
Mm.
they really need to think long term, and even five years is the maximum they can think of when it comes to the grants, the cap stuff.
Well, the
Uh,
premiums for
and on
forestry
top of
last
that,
a bit longer, in fairness.
huh?
The
Have they?
premiums for forestry last a bit longer.
Do
But
they?
again,
Great.
yeah, but you might get premiums for, say, 25 years on a 30-year crop. But at the same
Okay.
time, then the Irish government have signed up to and are legally bound by the EU targets to create 310 million tonnes of removals.
Right.
And the EU have been quite clear that if they're not hitting that target for removals, they will refuse to issue a license to harvest your trees. So now you
Okay.
could be stuck with those trees standing there. So you got your 25 years premiums, right? And now you're 30 years in and it's ready to harvest.
Oh, so
When
there is
you that
25 years. Sorry,
there is
but there.
well, there's 20 to 25 years. It depends on different schemes have had different buy-ins. But my point is this:
Okay.
forestry is a long-term project. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to grow a commercial crop because we need that timber for construction. So, once it's in a good place and well managed and their environmental concerns are taken care of, then you're looking at it and saying, okay, I'm going to 30-year crop of commercial timber. That's what I'm going for here. So you plant it. The first thing you have to consider is the fact that we have no bio and phytosecurity in this country. It is ridiculous. You know, people might say, oh, well, we have no, we have open borders because we have no effective stop on immigration. That's just for people. You should see the train wreck we have for plants. Okay, so we are shipping in diseased plants because this is not a government who can organize things and think things through and put in place infrastructure and use an evidence basis to draw the conclusions of what it is that they're going to try to do, and then listen to feedback and, you know, operate dynamically. If they existed in the private sector, we are talking about people who would be bounced on their heads all the way out the front door of any company that I've ever worked for, ever. The level of incompetence just makes me genuinely bleed inside my skull a little bit with the urge to say, you know what, pack your stuff, get out. Just get out. Just get out. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so what's happened, say, with the ash dieback is we were aware that there was disease in Europe for the trees, but we are pushing here plant ash, plant ash, plant ash, right? So we introduce the premiums, but what we don't do is we don't go and talk to the nurseries and say, listen, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time, we're going to introduce a big push for ash. And so we're going to need a lot of ash trees. Get cracking. Grow, grow, grow. Instead, we just announced. So the only way that the people who are taking up that offer can get the trees to be planted in order to meet the conditions to get the grant for the thing that you want them to do is to go to Europe. Then there's rumblings of this disease is in Europe. And the government say, yes, yes, we know, but we can't stop, you know, imports coming from Europe because that's against the whole Europe thing, and we'll be fine and it'll all be terrible. Listen, it'll be grand. Go on ahead, go on ahead, go on ahead, right? So all of these plants came in. Ash dieback arrived in Ireland. It has wiped out huge amounts of ash all over the country.
I know. I've cut them down, the ones that, yeah,
Yeah.
that are
So
going to fall on the road and everywhere.
now we have things killing the larch. Now we have things killing hawthorn. We have bark beetle. There is no phyto and biosecurity that
Yeah.
any forester can rely on. So take that piece, park it there for a minute, right? Then you plant your commercial crop. And you plant it with the knowledge that you are going to have a payment coming from this forestry for the next however many years that you've signed up for the term of your contract. But you must now plant it in the full awareness that in 30 years' time, when this crop is mature, you may or may not be allowed to harvest it. There is no implied right to harvest. And they can withhold a license from you anytime they want to.
Wow.
You can apply for a thinning license and be told no, because there's some guy who spends his life professionally. I have no idea what he does for a living, but he spends a huge amount of time filing objections to the issuing of licenses for thinning and felling forestry in this country. So everybody in the country has a right to an opinion whether or not you should be allowed to cut down these trees.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and I think they have done a lot of work to improve that
And
situation,
is
but that was an
what do you
absolute
think that's
disaster.
about? Is that like
It's because an
an
awful lot of the
environmental move, or
it's
it is a
environmental, but they want specific
part of
types of
okay.
forestry in specific types of areas that they see as being beneficial. And a lot of the more extreme ones are like, we should never be cutting any trees down. We should only be growing native trees, and it should be in a
Yeah.
native land. And, you know, all of it is, I don't know if you remember during the 90s, I'm going to say, because I am that old, I can't tell whether it's the 80s or the 90s. The Irish Lotto ran an ad featuring this woman in this sort of kaftani type thing with flowers in her hair, and she was like, I won the lottery, I'd buy a big field for all the ponies in Ireland, right? And you listen to some of these people talking and you just have a mental image of this ad. So a lot of these extreme environmentalists think that this is what we should be doing. We should all be in our kaftans in a moonlit circle
Yeah.
in the middle of our native forestry, singing Kumbaya or whatever it is that they want us to be doing. But let me come back here. So now you have your 30 years later, your children have your trees because maybe you planted it with a view to giving your kids something. Now there's no right to harvest. If let's assume they stayed free from disease and the crop grew really well and it's all ready to go, your kids will be told 30 years from now, you can't harvest that. because we don't have enough removals. So you're just not going, you're just going to have to let it sit there. You're not making any income from it. You have no way of making any income
And
from it.
that's a
You're not allowed
negative
to cut any
impact
of it.
on the farmer
It is, it
or the
is,
landowner or the
or the
forester, whatever you want
landowner.
to call yourself.
But let's say you weren't that lucky and it did get diseased. You now have an obligation to replant.
Right.
Is there any guarantee that what you're replanting it with is any healthier than what went in the first place?
Hmm.
And that replanting may well be happening at your own cost. And not only that, in 2021, they changed the state aid rules to specifically exclude foresters from being able to make a claim against the government for lost income due to the importation of disease.
See, this is why we need brains like yours and passionate people like you to be picking this apart from a business side and a whatever long-term strategic and pragmatic side. My God,
Who
like
would
this is
choose
the
the
big,
life?
big picture thinking and connecting the dots here.
It
That
is. I'm just I'm so angry all of the time. I'm just like,
I
because
know,
you're just seeing people being exploited and being put in completely untenable and unworkable situations,
yeah,
and then being kicked because they won't make it work somehow. And then you have government people stepping out. You have Micheál Martin stepping out to say, oh, the Irish herd has been growing exponentially. Like, read a figure, dude. We have the same number of cattle today that we had in 1973. But you wouldn't
really,
know that. Yeah, really. We actually might, after the last 2 years, there's been a bit of shrinkage the last 2 years. We might have less cattle today in this country than we had in 1973.
wow.
How many cars have got, like, how much has the volume of cars gone up? How much has the
Well,
volume
in
of people gone
Galway,
up?
we have the same amount of roads roughly, and we have a lot
To
more
be fair,
cars.
yes,
We have everything's just gotten worse in the traffic side of things.
it
So
really has.
yeah, I
But
definitely feel a lot more cars on the road there.
there is, but there's the same amount of cattle in the country. There's less farmers, for
Yeah.
sure. The farms have gotten a little bit bigger. And I like to think that, um, that people say, well, greedy farmers exploiting nature to make money. No, well, yeah, and also no. Here's the thing. Nobody cares more about water quality than a farmer.
Yeah,
If your water is messed up, then your animals that are drinking your water
yeah,
are not going to be healthy, and unhealthy animals don't make money.
yeah.
Ta-da! You know, one of the things that myself and my partner, we went to the Groundswell Festival in the UK. It's a regenerative agriculture festival. So
Oh,
both of
this is
us,
the thing I saw you on that
yeah,
debate.
yeah,
Well
and it's
worth looking up.
phenomenal.
I'll try and link it in
It, it's
however I do this.
a it's a huge experience to go. But I'll tell you, the thing that struck me the most, that was 3 days of thousands, and I do mean thousands of farmers. They're at their own expense having breakout rooms and webinars and demonstrations and tours and
Yeah.
talks and discussion groups and on how they can be doing what they're doing better. There is no recognition in the Irish media how much progress farmers have made in terms of water quality, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of environment, and in fact, in terms of climate change, if you want to get into it, to be fair to them. You'll have Elaine McGough from Antashka last year did a webinar with the Irish Environment Network, I think, on water quality. And she spent, I think, 8 minutes hammering at farmers. And then she spent 3 minutes talking about sewage.
Mm.
And 1 minute of those 3 minutes was dedicated to saying things like, in fairness to Irish Water, they inherited a very bad infrastructure and they have been doing their best. And I had to leave the room before I put my foot through the television. That, the bias is clear.
Yeah.
And farmers cannot stay being hammered the way that they are.
And sorry, what one big thing there is big industry, massive
Mm.
part, massive part on chemicals that go into an untreated water and everything. That's a huge part. That
I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to make a prediction. Within 3 years, you are going to hear a shift in the narrative about where nitrates in the water come from?
Right.
Right
Okay.
now, that's 90, 95, 98% all comes from agriculture. The nitrates in the water, the phosphorus.
Intensive and extensive, or
I
both,
don't
obviously,
think they
right?
make any distinction at all. I think as
Right.
long as you're kicking a farmer, it's all good, right? So um, I'm going to make a prediction in the next year or two, and certainly within the next three, there is going to be a gentle shift in how that's allocated.
Hmm.
Right now, it's like vast majority, 95, 98% of nitrates in the water comes from agriculture. And I'm willing to put myself out there to say that figure is going to change significantly in the very near future.
And where do you think it's going to change to? Big industry?
I think that, well, to be fair now, I'm going to say that a report in the UK, a study was launched last week to show that actually in the UK, to be very clear, that's not the same as here,
Yeah.
that sewage and industry were as big, if not bigger, a contributor to nitrates in the water than agriculture.
Wow. And you know, like they have a privatized system over there that's really messed up. So they
Mm.
are all eyes on trying to figure out what's really causing the issues with as little money as possible. And it's gone into the hundreds of millions, if not billions, to clean up
Yeah.
this stuff that they're trying to now figure out how to pay for because they messed that up completely based on a lie of Thatcher's to say, or a misleading
Mm.
concept to say, well, you're going to own your own water by buying shares in these companies that are created. And then in the end, what happens? You have big international funds who are the main owners of these water companies that have dried them through, taking the dividends out and not reinvesting the money to upgrade their water infrastructures. So they're really up shit's creek without a paddle in a
Literally,
way.
literally,
Yeah,
literally. But again, there's only one answer. It's do the work.
yeah,
It's not elegant. It's not pretty. It's not fun. Roll up your damn sleeves. Do the work. Stop offshoring stuff to private industry and then being surprised when they prioritize their profits.
yeah.
That's what they're supposed to do. That's what they exist to
Damn
do.
right.
That's practically their raison d'etre. So, like, I do not understand why we don't demand. It's like uh, the Irish government will just, whatever the NGOs think, that's what we'll do. And, we can provide funding to our preferred people who will tell us to do what we want to do anyway, but we need an excuse from you guys to make that happen.
Yeah.
And then we need to actually provide something physical, national biomethane strategy being a case in point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's up with that? So we have a huge problem with sewage in this country. Everybody knows it. You could, in theory. Now, and I'm not underestimating how very difficult this is because the kind of scale that we're talking about nationally and how you get gas from here to over here to burn it to produce electricity, all those things. I'm not saying that it is small, but I am saying that every molecule of sewage produced human waste in this country could be going into a biomethane digester
Mm-hmm.
and producing biomethane to provide electricity, which would help bridge the gap with renewables and what have you. And then the digestate coming out the other end, depending on circumstances, obviously bacterial contamination and all
Are
kinds of
you
things.
about to suggest human feces spread on as fertilizer?
I'm going to say Denmark do it.
Do they?
Hmm.
Wow.
Now, and again, there are criteria. So, like I myself personally, would I put digestate on my vegetable garden and then eat those vegetables? Even if they told me that it was biologically and bacterially like completely safe to do so, I'm going to say the answer is probably no.
This
Probably
is
no.
almost as icky as like us eating insects for protein. But I
No,
get you.
actually,
But there's a
nothing.
use. There's a use for everything.
There is a
There's a
use for
use for
everything.
everything
And
in
all of
waste.
that right now is being dumped in our waters.
Yeah.
And that is a resource that could be providing energy
Locally.
cheaply, locally, cheaply,
mm,
and, depending on, so like if you're a garden centre producing tons of pots of flowers for people to buy, what's the problem with using
yeah,
composted digestate?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Once
I
you've
mean,
tested and safe, what's
our
the problem? And so now you've dealt with two problems. You've boosted your energy supply and the security of your energy supply, and you've dealt with sewage being pumped into the water.
yeah, yeah,
And maybe you've
and you're
reduced
benefiting
fertilizers.
biodiversity.
You're benefiting biodiversity, and maybe you're reducing your artificial fertilizer use, because those people producing potted plants and things, they will be using artificial fertilizer, the emissions for which will be counted in agriculture, by the way, as will
Yeah.
golf courses and
Mm,
racetracks and sporting clubs and county councils and everybody who uses commercial volumes of fertilizer. The emissions that come from those are counted in agriculture. So when you hear about 23%, agriculture is 23% of Ireland's emissions, just bear in mind that non-agricultural emissions are included
wow,
in.
I did not know that. I
Yeah.
did not know. I know, like I looked at a few parts of your book that I wanted to cover actually with you. I don't know how much time we have.
I'm going
In
to have a hard stop very soon.
Yeah.
Uh,
But what I wanted to talk about, but we can maybe get into this another time,
yeah,
to because there's so much to unpack that would probably be good to actually talk about.
background.
Uh,
Yeah,
um, yeah, we'll do it another time. But yeah, the double counting, that was one of the things that
yes,
you know, that was
yes.
a big issue. And I guess, yeah, I guess like, I mean, the numbers are constantly changing. We were led to believe for a long enough time that 51% of emissions globally come from agriculture.
Mm,
Then now there's climate scientists saying, no, that figure is backwards. It's 15% or lower in many
yes.
cases, much lower. And these are like pragmatic, well balanced climate scientists who want to tackle the
Or
actual
PCP, like these are
issues.
credible people. We're not talking some work
Yeah,
job in the back, with his own little lab that in
yeah,
his mother's basement kind of stuff. We're talking
yeah.
about
Huge agreement.
really, really highly
Yeah,
regarded, immensely valued, incredible individuals,
yeah.
and they are being ignored.
And yet, on top of that, I could, geez, we could talk forever about big net zero agendas and the background of those. But like there's it's infiltrated education systems. I think Jane Buxton was talking about exactly this
Yeah.
in the I think it's the A levels or whatever they have in the UK, that there's a question, where do the majority of emissions come from in the world, and 51% was the answer, and
Mm.
it's agriculture, or it's how many emissions do agriculture make of the world pie of emissions,
Global
51%.
total,
And
like,
it's not a multiple choice question, so you're being indoctrinated to think that agriculture is
mm,
literally the thing that we need to tackle most for chemical farming, lab meat future, that has skewed people's minds so much that if they even hear us talking like this about these things, they go, "Whoa,
yeah,
you're
you're
talking
nuts.
crazy talk now."
You're nuts. You're nuts. Except it's all true.
It's
And
yeah,
and
and
let's
there's
go
big
on.
scientists saying that it's true. You
Well,
know?
let's go one further, because that's an injustice, right? So the hen harrier thing is an injustice that has happened. The forestry stuff and ash dieback and all those other things, these are injustices that have happened. And there's a lot of them. There
Mm.
are hundreds of reasons why no farmer in this country should trust anything that comes from the government, in my opinion. Obviously, they're
And
free to do whatever they like. But wait, so the climate one is one that is happening, but the full injustice of that has yet to come to fruition. The next one we have waiting is nitrates. And
right,
nitrates are hugely problematic, because we have a Minister for Agriculture that wasn't even bothered to go to the EU to discuss this with his counterpart. He got in a Zoom meeting. I'd quite like it if you did your job. As a farmer, you as Minister for Agriculture, I think it would be great if you actually did your job. And I think we're really, really missing in this country is the ability to fire people who don't do their job on a public level, right? So, because like I like the "you're fired" button is missing off my desk in a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
big way. And so, why'd you get involved
You'd
with
have
politics?
that thing
Because I
worn out.
can't take it anymore. That's why. But the nitrates thing, boil it down really quick. It's going to cost dairy farmers an estimated 60 million a year. And it's going to impact Ireland's economy by an estimated billion a year. Now, and again, we're back to proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, right?
Mm.
What does the research show about the impact of stocking density on nitrates levels? Research from Teagasc says very clearly that it is unlikely that changing the derogation levels and reducing those stocking densities will make any impact on water quality at all.
Mm-hmm.
When are we going to have evidence-based policymaking? It infuriates me that a bunch of people with clear anti-farming bias, who just don't like these group of people and would prefer they didn't exist, can jump up and down and make claims on the basis of nothing. They can band together. I listened to Pauline O'Reilly talk about how the Greens managed to get such a stranglehold in Europe. And honestly, it would make the hair stand on the back of your neck. She was saying this proudly. You know, we're such a small group and look at the disproportionate impact we've managed to have. And I'm like, yeah, look at the disproportionate impact you've managed to have. But they go to Europe, they jump up and down, they jump up and down, they jump up and down. Governments give them money and international bodies give them money, and they have professionals to assist them, and they have, you know, pro bono legal services, and they have government funding, and they have PR machines, and they have universities wading in behind them. And they manage to get something that's then coming from Europe that is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. And it is then implemented with no necessity to prove whether or not it's true, whether or not that means that you're introducing will have any impact whatsoever on your legitimate aim, or whether or not it's proportionate. And I'm going to say to you, if I was going to put somebody on trial, to fine them for something, to take away their license to operate like a taxi or other business that they make their livelihood from, or that I wanted to take their property as in punishment for a crime that they had committed, the burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt.
Mm.
That's the burden of proof from a criminal point of view to impact someone's fundamental rights and freedoms. There is zero burden of proof in relation to this, and there really needs to be. You know, I think that if you're going to take away the derogation and you're going to cost those farmers 60 million a year, and you're going to cost the economy $1 billion a year, you better have something more than it's not good enough. It's not good enough.
Yeah. I see. This is why, from the outside, if you're looking in on agriculture and you've seen all these farmers protest, and you're seeing, this is a very important point to make. You're seeing people, you know, tractors outside The Hague, tractors in Berlin, tractors everywhere, blocking whatever traffic, but kicking up a storm. You're looking at it, and I've seen the headlines, and it's like they're all anti-environment, they're all against any change, they won't accept. Bullshit. There are people that are, they do care, but they don't want crazy climate policy or poorly thought out stuff that's going to impact their livelihoods.
Yeah.
This should be for, especially for small farmers. My aunt said it, you know, this whole carrot and stick concept of how much carrot, how much stick. You're looking at a fragile bunch of people right now who are like, there's policy impacting them negatively, where there's no feeling that they're actually getting paid the other side. it's not like they're looking at, oh, there's environmental issues and climate change. Hey, well, we're going to be okay with these policy changes because we have reassurance that all our states, no matter where it is, um, are going to take care of us, and we won't be financially threatened, and we will come out of this all for the better. That's not the trust that farmers have in any of this. And it's
No,
not that they hate the environment.
no.
Most of my friends that are farmers love the land they're on.
Yes.
They've been there for generations.
And it's their
Um,
family home.
yeah, it's
Have to
their
bear in
home
mind,
home. Yeah,
it's like a part of their soul. Like
yeah,
for my
so
partner, his home here is literally, you know, it's something that is so much a part of him that
yeah,
you can't divide him from this. And
exactly.
it's hugely important. And you are correct because you never realize how that's presented
Yeah.
um, is shocking. And like, are there no investigative journalists in mainstream media who are willing to stick their neck out? And of course, the answer is no, there isn't, because they'll be fired. And
Really.
we really need to start thinking about the kind of world that we want to live in, because I'm not prepared to accept that. I think that the standards that we have for these things are, you know, say trust with government. Farmers have zero trust in government because they've spent effectively the last 30 years at least dealing with Pinocchio, and then being sort of slapped down every time they say, hey, is that guy's nose growing?
Yeah.
And it has to stop. It has to
And
stop. It cannot go on the way it is. It just can't. It has to stop.
yeah,
And
something's got to
so,
give.
well, it has. And I'm fond of saying that, some farmers will say to me sometimes, well, what can you or what can we do about it? And I think, I say to them, well, primarily one man built the IPCC and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and got 165 countries there to become signatories. One man built all this, and I think one really pissed off woman can kick it down. And you just have to be relentless enough and persistent enough, and I suppose open, and
Hmm.
just trying to learn and take on more information and more information and more information. But I am heartened all the time by yourself, by Jane Buxton, the group of guys, Groundswell. Oh my God, so amazing.
Yeah.
People like Frederick Leroy, Miles Allen. We have some great research coming out of Chagas. I'd love to see more of that funded, but that, of course, is the first step. Um, Frank Midloner. Now, that's not to say that I agree with everything that anybody might say. It just means
Certainly.
that these are adult people trying to have rational conversations that are informed at the start and become more informed as they go on, and
Yeah.
that different perspectives put on the table. People have said to me, oh, if you're elected, will you talk to the far right groups? And I'm like, oh, who's the far right?
Yeah.
And anyway, even if someone is a far right person, are they not your constituent?
Yeah.
You're not obliged to hear them. And I'm not saying that you necessarily take on or do a project or whatever, but I am saying that if you're going to represent people in this country, you need to represent them all, not little
Hmm.
bits of them, not, oh, I'm going to look around now and I'm going to find my preferred little people, and those people will get my complete and undivided attention, and all the rest of you will be completely neglected and ignored. And aside from anything else, I believe that the government are creating the far right. And I know that we've talked about this before. My question is, what the thing I can't see, I can see how people are becoming radicalized in their own interests, piece by piece, day by day
Yeah. You're
in
watching
this
it.
country.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very dangerous trajectory. And the government are absolutely 100% the driving force for that.
Yeah.
My question is it intentional or not? I don't know.
It's just like stepping outside of the well-to-do narrative that we have. Like, oh, that's seen blanketly as whatever, against
Mm,
the environment, against other races, against migration. And it's like, no, we have to have sensible there's a smart middle ground to almost everything.
Yes.
Once we go into extremes, once we shut other people's opinions down and don't have their, I respect everyone's opinion or their right to have an opinion, to listen to them. I,
Mm.
if you knew the lads I knew, uh, I love them to bits. I get on well with them on 80-90% of things, and even the 10% I'll laugh at, and I'll go, well, that's your opinion on it. Like, but I'm not going to shut them out for,
But also, you have to recognize that sometimes you're not really hearing their opinion. What you're hearing is their emotion.
yeah,
And that's a different thing. So, like, those of us kind of like, trained in communication and, have somewhat, even at that, we sometimes make a complete mess of
mm,
expressing ourselves, and we're not saying what it was that we intended to say, or we didn't understand how this thing was going to be heard by
yeah,
the other party and something. And you're like, wait, no, 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 no. I did not mean that at all. What I actually meant was this thing. And they're like, all right, okay, well,
yeah,
we'll just stay on the execution then, right? And so that happens on an everyday kind of basis. But then you talk about people who, um, they're expressing an opinion about something, and you say that that's their opinion, and that makes them bigoted, that makes them racist,
yeah,
that makes them whatever.
yeah,
No, that's not true. What you're hearing is their emotion, because very often they don't have the framework to express to you where the,
yeah,
like, sometimes a friend will ring you up and she will say, oh my God, I hate my husband. Right? Now, if you were to take that in the how we take everything in the public arena,
mm,
she really hates her husband and she should leave him, that poor man, so that he can find somebody who actually loves him. And, this is a big, hateful thing that she's just done. I know, as her friend, not only does she not hate him, she absolutely adores him. And frankly, I've seen his dishwasher loading habit. Sure, he's worthy of such adoration, but you do you, right? What she's expressing is her emotion, not
mm-hmm,
her opinion. This is
yeah,
somebody that she loves, absolutely, who has driven her to the point of breaking on whatever topic, and vice versa happens too, right?
yeah,
So when somebody says, I don't want these people in our country, maybe they do mean, I don't want these people in the country.
maybe,
Maybe what they mean is, my grandchild has scoliosis and can't get surgery. And I haven't, it takes a 3-week visit now to get into a GP, and something else and something else. And by the way, I got intimidated by 2 of these people as I was coming out of Aldi a week ago. And actually, my level of distress with how things are and how they're
mm,
going has reached a fever pitch. And now I'm saying this thing, which is accurate for how I feel, but it's not necessarily accurate for a decision that I would make if I had an opportunity to express the reasons why there are things in this that are problems for me. And if somebody were to pick out, the important parts of those and work towards solutions for the things that are problematic for me, then I wouldn't choose to express myself in this way. And I think that we impose ridiculously high standards, and we have academics, who are trained in like double, quadruple Salco speak, who then come and look down on people who maybe don't have that level of education or that
mm-hmm,
level of self-awareness or that level of self-control or even really understanding of where they are. And then they're just hateful to them because, oh, well, if you'd express something, in a dots connected, here's my bits of evidence, here's whatever kind of way. This is a person working all the hours that God sends, who has 3 small kids, who has whatever. They don't have time, and it's not their
they don't,
job. It was your job as a government leader to make sure that they weren't in that position, but you put them in that position. And then anytime they raise their head over the parapet to express distress, you shout bigot at them.
yeah.
And then so they come
Which
back
also
down.
fuels massive fire
It
as well.
fuels massive anger.
Yeah,
Massive anger. If you're kicking home from school and said, I hate that jerk next door, would you say, oh, that's the terrible, bigoted thing to say, be quiet? Or would you say, why? What did he do? What's happened? What's the context for this
yeah,
thing that you're expressing? And this is what I mean about rational adult conversations. I am really, really tired of this juvenile habit of just shrieking labels and names at anybody who says anything on a whole host of topics on which
Mm.
many people are negatively affected. And if they don't have the power to express themselves, those emotions will not go away. They will boil
They
over.
actually
And
go
people will
underground and it
become,
gets more dangerous.
they
It's the
just get
same,
more dangerous.
you know, like uh, Nazism in Germany is a huge thing, and I lived there for 10 years,
Yeah.
and I've friends who are guards there, and they were saying like if you shut down speech
Mhm.
of whatever it is that's been talked about, it goes underground and it gets
Yes.
more dangerous. So you
Yes.
need to actually have to be able to talk to people and thoughtfully disagree and all this stuff and respectfully listen to where the emotions are coming
Look
from.
for where the emotions are coming from to
Yeah.
understand the drivers for that. And that's really important because if somebody says, listen, my little grandchild is there on the waiting list for surgery for the last 5 years, and I read every day about how much we're spending on Ukrainian pets, and it makes me just so angry.
Mm,
That is totally understandable.
yeah.
Is it an appropriate way to express it? No. But is the standard that unless you can express things in a way that we consider to be absolutely appropriate and absolutely standard, then you have license to speak? No, it isn't. You have a license to speak full stop.
Yeah.
The people who are supposed to be in charge of this country have a choice about how they listen. And they need to do a better job of that. Because you couldn't run a company, you couldn't run a coffee shop with the attitude that they have to people who have a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, if you
It's
were
not
trying to solve,
defusing the situation either. It's making
no,
it
it's not.
worse.
It's
The
making it
flames are
worse, and
getting
that's what I'm saying. I
like,
can't I can't work out to my own satisfaction or from my own thoughts whether I think it's intentional or not. But they are absolutely doing it. Like there's no denying that this is happening, and you can absolutely, if you're working with teams of people, there's going to be conflict between them.
yeah,
And if you pick out one and say, right, you're not allowed to be criticized,
yeah,
and anyone who has any criticisms is going to shut the hell up or will threaten them with being sacked, wait till you see how productive your company will be in 3 years' time.
yeah, they'll get ripped apart.
Well, nothing will get done because the underground rebellion movement will be in the break room working
Well,
out. They're
the other
working
thing,
against the company interests all the time. This is why consensus is important. Bringing people along with you is
yeah,
important.
always
Valuing
think that.
people.
I always think that if we don't bring the people along with all the big issues we're facing today, like people have a narrow focus on environment or whatever, but we have to deal with it all. And
Yeah.
if you're not managing to bring the majority of people along with smart solutions, smart like just smart policy, good and good conversation that takes people's it's all democracy, how democracy should work.
It is.
Where if we don't listen to people, then that thing starts bubbling up there, and then it'll 5 years down the line smash that side, and then that side bubble smash.
They do, but even in your own community, if you met with a particular group of farmers or did a talk with them or went to see them or had a discussion with them, there are some other people within the farming community who go, oh, here we're racist now, father. Do you know?
Mm,
And like, I hold my own opinions. You don't have to know me for much more than 5 minutes to know that I'm not easily influenced
mm.
by, well, anything really. Um, I came out of the womb just arguing about stuff. That's how I function. And people used to say,
That's
"Oh,
why I want you in my corner, not against me.
you should be a lawyer." And it took me a long time to realize that that wasn't a compliment.
Come on, it's kind of a compliment. I know a few lawyers.
It just means that you're scary. That doesn't mean that we like you. So, but I
Ah,
think
come on, I like it. Yeah.
well, I mean, we would rub along pretty well because thoughtful disagreement is possible. But I just, yeah, I'm not easily swayed. I'm not easily influenced. And even for myself, I got shouted down on one occasion because I was going to speak with a particular group. And
Mm,
some other people were like, oh, well, they're, far right and they're racist and they're what have you, and you'll only be damaging your own reputation if you go. And I said, yeah, but I'll be damaging my own integrity if I don't.
Yeah.
Because myself and John said at the start, every farmer in this country and beyond is going to be impacted equally by what's coming down the road for us.
Yeah.
And the only thing in this moment that I have the power to do is to share information.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care where you are. And maybe it's coming from a legal background that you look at things differently, because if you're a lawyer, if you're a criminal defense lawyer, you don't pick your clients based on their likability or their values or their principles. If somebody's murdered somebody, they're still entitled to legal representation, and it is your job to do it as well and as thoroughly and correctly, to vigorously defend your client's interests. That's your job, and you should do it. If I have information to share with farmers that might help them find a way to steer a course that might help them survive, then I have an obligation to share that. Yeah. And I don't really care who you are.
That's your integrity. Yeah.
Well, either you believe that you don't, in a way, we've talked about Terry Pratchett before, but he said those that can do have to do for those who can't, and someone has to speak for those who have no voices. And it's not. If you can do, you should. And you shouldn't stand there and say, well, I thought that you should be denied information about, things that are going to massively affect you and your fundamental rights in the future because I don't like the clothes you wear. Or I don't like the religion you are. Or I don't like whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not down with it. I'm just not, I'm always amazed by how bigoted the very people shouting bigot often are. Because, there's acceptable reasons to discriminate against people and there's non-acceptable reasons to discriminate against people. And I have to say, I don't really believe that. I think that you should try to be as open as you can possibly be. And on that note, I really am going to have to go.
Same. I just felt that too. Absolutely lovely talking to you, really.
And you also.
And you're a breath of fresh air in this madness when it comes to climate policy and how I feel it's going down a wrong path in so many ways, and we're just not looking at it in the right way and shifting it to go the right way that benefits everyone. It can be done that way. And
farmers are working hard to drive it that way, in fairness to them.
Yeah, they are. And they're already busy as hell. They've a load of stuff on their plate. So any little bit of extra effort is the exact same as asking any of us to do extra in our work. So it's very commendable what farmers are doing and what you've done. Fair play to you for biting into this book issue. The issue that you've put into the book, and thanks, and I'm sure we will talk again.
I'm sure that we shall. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much, Nadaline. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please hit the like and subscribe button so you'll see more of my content in the future. It would really mean a lot to me because I'm just starting out. Thanks, and see you soon.